This is some agateware clay. It's 2 different colors of clay I made layers of, and I just wedged it once or twice to help it start getting into a ball. And then I pat the ball into a nice round and smack it down in the center of the wheel. So agateware is a little difficult for me to throw because I'm using 2 different clay bodies, and I can't really wedge the clay as much as you normally would because that would amalgamate the layers of clay into one color, and I want to keep the colors separate. So sometimes, or actually quite often, I have air bubbles in my clay, which makes centering the clay harder, and then I have to pop bubbles as we throw. We'll see how this ball does. So what I'm doing here is centering the clay. First I pull it up, then I push it down so the clay gets centered on the wheel. Feels pretty nice. I'm not sure I have any air bubbles in this one, but we'll see. After you get the clay centered into the middle of the wheel, you need to open it up by pushing your finger down, straight down in the middle. Not all the way to the wheel head unless you're making something without a bottom, but I'm planning to make a bud vase, so I push my finger down to about a 1/4 inch away from the bottom, and then I pull my finger towards me to open up the clay. Once I've got the clay opened up as far as I want the bottom to be open, I use my fingers and go back and forth across the bottom to get that all nice and finished off before I start pulling up the walls. Okay, normally I don't throw with a sponge on the outside, but because these 2 clays are different consistencies, it's kind of hard to throw, so my sponge on the outside helps me with this tricky combination of clays. So what I have here is I have a white stoneware and a brown stoneware. They're Laguna 65 and Laguna 80, and I use these 2 clays because I found that they shrink about the same amount, so they don't separate from each other when my pot's drying. So now I can see air bubbles. I felt air bubbles, I heard them, I see them. When I see that, all I do is I take my needle tool and poke through them to pop the bubble. And hopefully next time I pull the walls up, they will all pop and not give me any trouble. We'll see about that. So I want to add just enough moisture to the clay so my fingers don't stick, but not so much that it gets so wet that the clay becomes weak. I kind of slow down when I feel the air bubbles, so hopefully my fingers will help them pop and I can hear them, so maybe it's successful. So this is not a very large lump of clay, so I'm not going to be making anything big. Just wanted to do a quick agateware demo piece because I've been making agateware mugs, and on Facebook people have shown an interest in seeing what the process is like. So this is my first attempt at a throwing video, so forgive me if it's awkward. Still kind of feel a bubble in the middle there, but I don't think it's going to be too much trouble. So if you're throwing anything that you want the top to be kind of narrow, you have to make sure when you're making your cylinder that you don't let it flare out at the top. Okay, I think that's pretty much as much height as I'm going to get out of this piece of clay. So now I'm going to start shaping it. And I love forms that round out at the bottom. So I'm putting more pressure on my inside hand and just supporting the wall on the outside with my outside hand to push some of that clay out. And I'm stopping to check for an air bubble that's still giving me a little trouble, and I can see it right in that area. So I'm going to continue to shape by pushing out from the inside with my fingers. And when I get towards the top, I'm going to ease up so I don't push the top out. What I'm doing here is collaring in to help keep the top narrow and give it a little extra height. I'm quietly thinking about where I still have little air bubbles in this pot that are irritating me. And I'm going to think about finishing up the shaping, and I'm going to use my metal rib It's been sitting in my clay water, so it's all. My metal rib is a nice thin plastic rib, and I use it to help shape and to scrape the slurry off the off the outside of the pot. So you'll notice I can remove some clay from the bottom of the pot there. As I scrape the outside of the pot, it will scrape off the slurry, and the agateware pattern gets revealed. Oops. And then I have to scrape that excess clay off my rib. And I'll do that again as I finish shaping the belly of my pot. And when this pot is leather hard, I'll probably come back and do some trimming on the outside with my trimming tools to finish cleaning off any smudgy areas of slip left behind. I've flipped my rib over, so I'm using the rounded side on the neck of the vase to clean that off. And the top of my pot seems a little off kilter, so I can use my needle tool to trim that nice and level. And I use a chamois cloth to smooth the lip of the pot. This is especially important on mugs and things where your mouth is going to sit. So when I use the chamois, it gets a little slurry action going there again. So when I come back and trim, I will trim that away. This is actually a fairly decent mug shape. I might have to throw another mug tomorrow. The videos I made yesterday were about trimming mugs, pulling handles and attaching handles, and I didn't feel like making any more handles, so I wasn't planning to make a mug today, but this is a pretty nice mug shape, so maybe tomorrow I'll pull another handle and this will become a mug. So the last step I'm doing here is using my sponge on a stick to clean out any water and clay that's in the bottom of the pot, so it will dry nicely. And I use a little wooden tool to cut off the excess clay at the bottom that I don't need. And then I take a wire tool and cut under so the pot can dry and not stick to the back. And that's a freshly thrown agateware pot.